Hey, White Sox fans, Brett Ballantini here with you again, hosting the Side Sox Podcast. This is number 17. It's another Paisan podcast. He's over by there. It's Rob Colletti joining me again on the Side Sox Podcast. Welcome, Rob. Good to have you back.
Parmesan, gabagool. I don't know any other ones, but I love The Sopranos.
Legit enough. Now, let's just lead this right off. The main, I think our main discussion point here, though, we're going to probably talk about a few different topics, even though the hot stove is very cool right now, and events of the world have sort of cooled everything down in sports a bit, or they should, is the series. 2 out of 3 have been published on Southside Sox, the report card series that Rob is penning for us. And Rob, let me just lead off. Is this the first time you've actually sat down and put, say, 10,000 words towards grading the White Sox? Is this something you just did in a notebook and didn't publish it before? Or is this a first-time experience for you?
It is my first time publishing a report card. I do sit alone in my room and cry as I scribble negative things about Sox seasons past. With my own little grade book to go along with it. But seriously, what was really cool about this year is that there was such a wide gambit of performance levels that occurred on our team. And, there are years where you look at, like, say, the 2009 Phillies. You would look at that team when you'd go report card. Okay, well, everyone gets a C+ or better, like in the worst case scenario. Maybe one player had a D on that team. On our team, we had this really successful, raucous, surprising appearance from so many youngsters, and a lot of disappointments from players that were veterans that you expected to be better. And it really lended itself to sort of formulate into this general idea for what people do every year, and kind of just grading the Sox based on their capabilities. And I think that being able to sit down here and really filter through all of these players and look at all of them, I mean, I'm feeling confident about the grades that we gave to all these players. And I mean, frankly, I think that a lot of them will improve next year.
Were there guys going in? I mean, you had an idea, you had your notes in your head from the season. Were there guys going in either hitting? And by the way, everyone, if you've read the stories probably already, but I'm linking both, obviously, in the body of this with the podcast as well, so you can refer back if you'd like. But going in, you had an idea of who would be. But as you sort of got into the numbers and got into writing and got into context, whether it's on the pitching or hitting side, was there a guy or two that ended up with a worse or better grade that maybe you anticipated?
Oh yeah, I also changed grades as I was writing. I changed grades for players, sometimes 2 or 3 times, because I would say, well, for example, I initially had Cody Hoyer at like a B-, and I was like, he was really solid this year, but he didn't do very much. And the more I not only looked at his statistics but rewatched film of him playing this year, I could not help but be impressed on such an enormous level. I mean, the kid is playing years beyond his age. I had to bump him up. If I remember correctly, I gave him an A- or an A. He deserves it, in my opinion. And with the other side of the coin was the same too. I think I initially had Gio Gonzalez at like a B- or a C+, because there were times where he really looked great, and those stuck out in my head. But looking back at his play and then remembering how, like, not only watching him lose his cool on the mound so easy, but then remembering some of the horrible situations that he didn't pitch the right way into. And I blame some of that on Renteria, which I mentioned more than 3 times, I think, in the piece. But, of course, things will surprise you. In the batter's piece, I think I initially gave Encarnacion like a C- or a D+, and he moved down to an F, because regardless of him hitting 10 home runs, there's too much there that went wrong. And for how much money he made, for the role he was expected to play, for the playing time he received from Ricky Renteria, I mean, it was just awful, man, awful. And all this to say, yes, of course, there were adjustments that needed to be made, but I think it was all well thought out.
It's good, and we're not going to get into we're not going to have a debate, and we're not going to disagree on all these, because I think by and large the grades are sound, and I think the comments on the articles have indicated that as well. I picked out a couple I made notes, but it's funny you mentioned Gio, because, and it's interesting you start him so high, because in fact, when I saw what you had, I thought, man, that's actually even still a little generous. And he was a fun guy to talk to. You had very high hopes of what he would do for the Sox this season, as you point out, from both the veteran side, which I think he did fulfill, even though he indicated early on in the Zooms that he was aware that this wasn't his clubhouse. He was aware he was a newcomer to the team. So I think he maybe even perhaps too much sort of minded his space in terms of a leadership role, but I think that probably developed over the years. So I think he did give something to the White Sox. Not much on the field. I think you even see perhaps a little more good in what he did on the field than but it was interesting whenever he did pitch to be able to talk to him, because there was always something you picked up in the audio, him cussing on the mound after throwing yet another ball and not being able to get the ball to the plate. It was always something fun to play off and ask. And sometimes he'd sort of take the bait and sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he'd keep it cool. And other times he'd be like, he'd be pretty frank. So he was actually at least pretty frank and open about, in a way, how bad his season was. I know it was very disappointing for him. And I think particularly at the end of the season, to not be able to get the vote of confidence from Renteria to get back, though he probably didn't earn it, to get back into the rotation when he came back from his, I think, groin injury. You could see that in the pregame interview, the disappointment he had, where he's just like, hey, you got to ask him, because I can't tell you. Because I think I asked him directly, hey, are you back in the rotation? Or are you going to fill an open spot coming up? And he was just like, yeah, it was, a truncated year and sort of a disastrous year. And actually, it turns out, I think you were actually a bit generous to Gio. And I love the guy, and I had high hopes for him, but
listen, I fully understand that perspective. I think specifically with these grades, as I say in the beginning of the article, it's not just about the numbers on the page. And with Gio, I think I actually started off that bit where I said that stats don't tell the entire story with his year. And I the same way that I look at these grades from a teaching perspective, if I'm teaching students, I would include in their grade not just the test scores and the pop quizzes. It's also about the effort they put in the classroom, right? The work that they're doing in general. And for whatever it's worth, statistics that left some things to be desired, notwithstanding, the guy was, in my opinion, just as good at his job as 90+% of starting pitchers in the major leagues. And that puts him in the top 10 percentile. And I mean, that gives him an A grade, in my opinion. And again, all this is obviously opinion based, right? You could make an argument for why Giolito had a C- year if you really want to be that subjective about it. But I think that there's also credit that needs to be given for things that are intangible, that show up off of the page. And obviously the no-hitter's a big deal. The dude is showing metric improvement in a number of categories, despite not being quite where he was in 2019. But all in all, I would say that Gio was graded a little harshly this year, or treated a little harshly this year by critics and people who were holding the White Sox to a higher standard very quickly. You have to remember too, in April of last year, we were going into the beginning of the season, I guess March, until, coronavirus ruined everything. Our expectations for the year were, let's finish over 500 and let's make that progression forward. Let's at least become a playoff contender. Now we're immediately talking, well, we need a World Series soon. This is a team that can win 100 games a year. And Giolito carried more than his weight in that realm.
Absolutely. And the truth is, the White Sox have legitimately two aces in the staff now, which is great, except when you look at the fact that there sort of is nothing else, which you've addressed.
I'd argue three. Slightly. Lance Lynn is.
No, now we have it. Last year.
Yeah, last year.
We had a lot of prayer.
We had two aces and 7 long relievers.
Ouch. But we'll get to looking ahead for the offseason here in the second half. And again, let's make it clear that as the publisher of this piece and the writer of this piece, we came to agreement on most of this. But what we're going to talk about are things that are maybe a little bit different. And conversely, though I thought you were perhaps generous to Gio Gonzalez, the grade for Jimmy Cordero was a little rough. He's down at a D+, and clearly a lot of that, as you point out, stems from the overuse from Ricky Renteria, and the fact that, listen, the numbers don't lie. He did have a rougher year, despite the fact he pitched in half of the games, for God's sake.
Yeah.
But tell me why he got graded, I guess, as poorly as he did, as a guy who really did pretty much suck it up for the team.
Jimmy Cordero.
Yeah.
Ultimately, as I think I said this too, I do blame Ricky Renteria for a lot of his struggles, but at the same time, you can only give him so much of the blame, right? Matt Foster pitched more innings than Jimmy Cordero, and Matt Foster made some mistakes and ended up having a pretty spectacular year, all things considered. For me, my grading system, I essentially I finesse it by giving what I think the initial grade is, and in some instances it stayed as I wrote, and in others, as I wrote it, I would see, well, this player shouldn't belong below that player. What did I give them?
Right.
Okay, and I would adjust their grade a little based on, well, I guess maybe it's not quite as high as I thought, and this guy, maybe it's not quite as low as I thought, and it would move up the list. Cordero, I initially had in the mid-Cs, if I remember correctly, and he fell down too. Because ultimately he possessed the worst WAR, not just on the pitching staff, on the team. And again, whether or not Ricky Renteria is to blame for some of that, Cordero had some control issues this year that were his fault. And I'm not taking anything away from him. I actually think I also say in the piece that if anybody, earned the right to come back despite, his counterpart being fired, Cordero's the one who's probably earned it. But I also, I give high grades here and I give low grades here. Nobody here is getting, off scot-free. And I did my research too. I looked at other report cards from other sites, and there were, teams that gave, I think I had Dylan Cease a C+, and if I remember correctly, somebody gave Dylan Cease an F for the year. And I just, for me, I'm not looking at it in a way of trying to find a mathematical specificity to exactly measure every single player's exact abilities. It's a fluid, ever-changing, built on dynamics and intangibles sort of a thing that requires some insight, but also the ability to kind of be flexible with how you define things. And particularly with Jimmy Cordero, one of the things that I love about him is he has this really great energy of, showing the guns, like going out in the mound and being the gamer with the wide eyes when he throws. And I love that. I think that immediately adds something that doesn't show up on the page that not every player has. Cody Hoyer has a similar way of doing that but differently. He's like Cool Hand Luke, he's unshaken. And Jimmy Cordero has those traits, but whether it was overuse or misuse, or whether it was not being able to place his pitches, or whoever is to blame, him or Renteria, or who they were playing, the metrics of who he was going up against, there were a number of situations where he was put in where obviously other relievers were projected to have done better. Yeah. And again, Renteria just mismanaged the hell out of this bullpen. Yeah. I think there was too much Cordero did wrong on his own to let him get off without being judged for it.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, in a season like this, first of all, you got a super small sample size. This is stuff you acknowledge as well. And, even if and WAR can be really tricky too, because clearly his WAR is terrible. Baseball Reference, you go to, I think it's Fangraphs, I think it's actually positive. So, you get that, it's why I like to sort of average across the three, but clearly the numbers are going to jump out here. And, you're talking about at times where guys have got like a 4-inning sample size or a 2 appearance sample size for good and bad. And so, this by definition, because it was such a weird season, is going to, and you could still legit grade based on what you're seeing from potential trends and so forth. And in a lot of cases, a legit body of work.
Yes.
A lot of times on the offense side, any of these regulars, you can still extrapolate when you're talking about a third of a season of starts for at least a few guys in the rotation. So there's some legit projecting you can do, and some of it is a little bit more spitballing in this season or this past season of any. But
absolutely, yeah.
And before we jump into a little bit maybe more of the offensive side and our break, let's address one more pitching situation, and that's, I guess, 3 of the younger starters. Dane Dunning, who, of course, is no longer here, so, hey, this is his last grade with the White Sox anyway, who gets a B minus, which might even be seen as a little harsh, even though he did sort of lose it pretty much, in his truncated season. Started strong and sort of shocking, and then sort of tapered into the playoffs. Dylan Cease gets the C plus, and Dylan Cease all season. And listen, I don't think anybody denies he may have the best stuff on the staff, but was lost all season, could not find the plate, was cool about it, to his credit, getting the C plus. Reynaldo López, the only difference to me, aside from the fact that, I think you got to say that Dylan Cease's pedigree and his stuff and his potential is perhaps significantly better than Reynaldo López's. But I think the big difference between those two guys is López was dumb enough, emotional enough to vent his frustration about his poor play, which earned him a ticket to Schaumburg, and he was sort of lucky to get back. I think if you don't have some injury issues, he doesn't come back. But he gets the D minus. And those three, I think you could make a lot of arguments that those could be in a different order. So let's talk a little bit about how the lame back end of our rotation sort of wriggled out for you in your mind on the report card.
Yeah, and this kind of went into listing which players belong where on the list, right? And because for me, it wasn't just giving a grade; it was also how does the grade compare to other people's grades. And for me, I couldn't, in good conscience, give a better grade to Dylan Cease than Dane Dunning, because ultimately Dane Dunning's quality of year was a little bit higher. Marginally, but I would say so.
And he got the call in the playoffs. I mean, I think that sort of says it right there. He got
exactly
the start.
And I would disagree with you wholeheartedly regarding Reynaldo López. In fact, I almost gave him an F. And
I'm not lobbying for him to be better. It's just contextual that you're talking about.
For me, I actually think that there's a legitimate argument, and I left this out of my piece, that Reynaldo López still belongs in the minors. He has obviously flashed brilliance. He's had multiple games with 10 plus strikeouts. The dude has the stuff to be a dominant power pitcher in the majors, but he doesn't have the composure or the experience, or I think the mental fortitude to go up against the plate vision of the best hitters in baseball that by and large sit in the American League, I would argue.
And what's tricky with López is, because I think he's out of options, by committing to not tendering him, maybe they're thinking his $2 million or whatever it's supposed to be, his arbitration price tag is going to scare any team away, but that may prevent them from being able to put him where he probably rightfully should be. And let's face it, Schaumburg was sort of, the minors, I guess. Yeah. But that could handcuff the Sox into having to use him, or maybe just dumping him for free.
Yeah, and I think, part of it, too, in terms of dumping for free, you have to look at what López came with, and it's Giolito. And frankly, if it was just Giolito that came over for Eaton, the trade was still a win. We also got López and Dunning. So for me, you take risks on prospects and some don't pan out. That's just how it goes. I'm indifferent on López at this point. I think he has so much more to prove than he doesn't. I think Dylan Cease has done a much better job of proving what he's capable of doing. But, for Reynaldo, what he really is incapable of learning, at least so it seems so far, is his ability to spot his pitches. And what I have seen just in the last 24 hours is James Fegan over at The Athletic is reporting that Ethan Katz has been working with Dylan Cease and Reynaldo López already, and that he's changed the arm angle on Reynaldo López's release, and he's already seen improvement. So obviously the Sox are working with him. They envision him being able to continue to work. What he brought, and I'm grading 2020. I'm not grading 2021. I'm not grading 2019. I used future and past instances to explain why the organization may or may not do something, but his grade was for 2020, and he performed really poorly. He's also not a rookie anymore. He's had plenty of experiences, and he also has had plenty of time to prepare. And frankly, I actually would say Ricky Renteria's grade might be buoyed a little bit because of how well he handled Reynaldo. There may have been managers out there who would say, well, he just has the natural stuff, we have to try anyway, and would have let the guy throw an 8.5 ERA over the course of the entire season. So, this is all subjective too, and there's no way to really know. Really quickly, I want to touch back on Dane Dunning because, you said that maybe the grade deserved to be a little bit higher. The reason that I gave him a B- is because there were so many question marks coming into the season, and he left just as many, even though the questions changed when the season ended. The Tommy John surgery was obviously something that derailed him, and it's beyond his control. And he had time to come back, and in the minors, he didn't look quite the same, but he was still getting similar numbers. When he came up, his first 3 starts were lights out. Everything looked great. But you did see twinges of things to worry about. And, again, I'm not a professional baseball scout, but I have been playing the sport since I was 5 years old. I started playing T-ball when I was literally 4.5. I've been going to White Sox games since I was a toddler. I've been watching major league pitchers throw since I have had cognitive development, and I would say that I have at least enough experience in watching the sport to know when someone is dominant or not. And I think scouts are too high on Dane Dunning. I think Rick Hahn trading him now is going to end up being a great idea, regardless of how old Lance Lynn is, because Dane Dunning throws a 92-mile-an-hour fastball. And best case scenario, yes, he turns into a Cy Young winner and maybe puts it together to be the next right-handed version of Dallas Keuchel. Very cool. Good for him. But the likelihood of that seems really slim. And frankly, I don't foresee it happening in this window of contention, at least not in the front end of it. So, again, for me, the season was sort of a list of question marks that turned into more question marks. He did do some things that I didn't expect him to do, but he did a lot. That goes both ways. There were good things I didn't expect him to do, and there were bad things I didn't expect him to do.
Yeah, Cease and López are guys with the stuff to different degrees, of course, and have this potential. Dunning, the thing you kept hearing about what he did impressively, and maybe less so at the end of the season, was composure. You heard McCann say, man, the guy is so composed. He's got a maturity. And listen, Cease is cool too, but you can't give him credit for composure when he just can't corral that control. Of course, he hasn't even gotten to a full year's worth of starts in his career. He had 10 or 12 at the end of 2019. Again, another 10 or so. So he's still not even to his 30, 35 start mark of what a normal full rookie season might be. So, in which you cannot point to, as you pointed out, you can't say the same of López because he's what, 70, 80 games in his career, despite the fact his age is not that much older than Dylan Cease. Maybe he's our Nomar Mazara, which is frightening. But okay, those are, and again, that's sort of the grouping, because those were the guys who were, they were going to be the 3, 4, and 5, right? I guess Dunning wasn't looked at in that way, but certainly 3 and 4 going into this very season, and both to different degrees failed. Obviously, López was lucky to come back.
Yeah.
The one thing he did to Rennery that made it clear that Rennery wasn't going to kick him around is because he went after him. It was a very maybe subtle way, but he went after him. And when you've got a guy who's known as like the papa or the grandpa of the locker room, and you're throwing him under the bus.
Yeah.
That's really the dumbest move you can.
Yeah. And for whatever it's worth, regarding the comparison of Cease to López, there was never a point in the season where I was like, Dylan Cease is going to the minors. No. Of course, he's not living up to his potential right now. Right. But at one point, neither was Giolito. There's also, I think, a really unfair stigma that comes with players who are compared to all-time greats like Pedro Martinez and Reynaldo López's case. And, Dylan Cease, I think the closest comparison he's been made to is Mark Pryor for like a major great pitcher, but I think he has the ability to be much more than that. And sadly, I think Reynaldo López has the ability to be much less than Pedro Martinez. And I don't know if it's because he's heard the comparisons too much or because he gets in his own head for other reasons and he can't get his command under control. But Cease has command issues and he doesn't have the same statistical output or the same character output. There are differences in who they are on a multitude of levels. And I thought Cease had a better year on the whole.
Yeah. And, there's there's an optimistic future with Cease that none of us, being honest, none of us at this point, maybe a year ago, we might have still felt it was a little bit closer, and there were probably still people who maybe really saw a more optimistic future for Reynaldo López. I don't think there were many, but I think there were. I don't think anyone can go in as a smart fan into 2021 saying that, even if you're not bullish on Cease. I just don't see anybody who makes the argument that says that López has a higher arc. I mean,
Right.
let's hope they're both fighting for the number 4
maybe Cats
role.
both of their problems.
Yeah,
maybe they both,
sweet.
maybe we end up having a problem where we have 7 starting pitchers. And please, I'll take it.
It could happen. Let's take a quick break. We're going to get a little bit more into the report card, and then we're going to talk a little bit more cold, hot stove, I guess, here in January 2021. But we will be back on the podcast in just a second. On the video, just close your eyes for a couple seconds. We'll be right back. Hey there, we are back. Side Sox Podcast, number 17. I'm here with fellow Paisan. It's Rob Colletti. Somewhere in the house is Chewy running around, maybe getting ready to bark. He's not made his presence known. Every other pet, I believe, in the vicinity of a Southside Sox podcast has made him or herself known. So, so far, early award for best behaved puppy dog, or maybe even cat or bird, is Chewy Colletti. So,
Chewy.
Step it up, man.
His full name is Chewbacca Rocco Colletti.
Chewbacca Rocco. Well, now I gotta say, Chewy, you're laying down, because that kind of name almost commands command.
We were playing pretty intensely this morning. He's probably having a
Let's just move over briefly. There was really one distinction I wanted clarified on the offensive side, which is the older article, I think published maybe a month-ish ago, but that's also linked here in the body of this podcast.
Yeah.
And it is the Sexy Dancing for Dubs partners. We got Danny Mendick, who you're fairly bullish on in terms of what he brings to the team, and not just his dance moves. Gets a B+. Zach Collins, who I have to say, if we're going to ding Ricky Renneria for his bullpen management, which is sort of easy to do, we can all do that in our sleep, we're going to have to dog him for, well, the way he handled his offense in general, certainly his DH spot, and the way he handled Zach Collins for how he was used, and when he was thrown out there, he basically was kept idle. I don't know where he was supposed to go, so I understand that Ricky Renneria's hands perhaps were tied a bit by just having him there on the roster, but for a lot of times he was in Schaumburg when the Sox could have maybe used a third catcher and had McCann or Grandal taking some at bats away from Edwin Encarnacion. Perhaps we're getting to some of the reason why Ricky Renneria was fired. But Zach, and I am no Zach booster, let me make that very clear. Zach gets the D+, and both of them seem to be in a similar situation. Mendick, by injury, got an opportunity and largely ran with it. Zach Collins had no such opportunity, so it's sort of hard to give him a grade. But let's talk about why we're bullish on one, maybe bearish on another, at least for 2020. And let me know what you think they might have in store for us in 2021.
Well, I mean, personally, I think if there's any player on the Sox who isn't currently a starter that could be on another team, Danny Mendick actually has the skill set to be a legitimate major league top 10 second baseman or position at any position, not him specifically, but like in the second base realm, he would be a top 10 second baseman. Danny Mendick is the only player on the team who had a Gold Glove nomination despite not being the only player in the league who had a Gold Glove nomination despite not being a starter. He is still learning to make his contact the way that he should, but he's clearly improving. All of his metrics suggest so. And if you think about what the second base position is in the majors, players like Cesar Hernandez 3 years ago were considered to be bench players. And now he's, a legitimate starter who is highly respected at the position. It's the type of position that you don't need to be a power hitter. You don't need to be a world-class defender. It's an easier position to defend in terms of what arm strength is required, but it still requires agility and the ability to, move side to side and play great defense on the steal and the tag and covering from the outfield, etc. he does all of those things at an exceptional level, and he's never gotten full playing time. He's only been able to fill in for injuries.
Right.
And, for whatever it's worth, I partially grade him, not just given what his batting average is, which I think was like 240 or 250 or something. And, he had like 100 some at bats. So yeah, you could say, should it have been as high? But I think he's easily, if not the best, certainly one of the best platoon infielders that any team has, given his age, his ability to run on the base paths, ability to steal bags, his elite defense. And I don't foresee his swing getting worse. Every single metric suggests that he's getting better. And over time, like, think about Mike Yastrzemski in San Francisco. He was considered a tier 3 prospect.
Right.
At best, even when he was still playing in the majors, and he didn't blossom until he was 30 years old.
Yeah.
That guy is one of the best outfielders in baseball right now.
Yeah.
And you can't argue with that, not only because of how he plays, but even based on statistics. Stats don't lie.
Yeah.
So I again, and this isn't just about stats, it's about the character of the player, who they are in the clubhouse, the dancing with Mendick stuff. He brings something out of his teammates. I'm doing the Italian thing. He brings something out of his teammates that is just so rare. The intangibles. I have an immense amount of respect for the kid, and I think it might not be with the Sox, but he's got a bright future.
So Rob, okay, tell me this then. Let's stick on Mendick. And even though he doesn't have the outfield chops that Leury Garcia does, do you foresee the type of role and the importance you think the White Sox will place in terms of keeping him on the roster so he can play a role like, say, a Yomer Sanchez has, or to some degree Leury has done, even though Leury has certainly more experience in the outfield, which Mendick, I think, has got some left field play in the minors. I'm sure is capable at least of left field. Do you see him filling a role to the point where maybe he takes over for where Garcia maybe leaves off if he was to depart the White Sox after 2021? Do you think the White Sox are placing that kind of importance on him?
No, I don't. At least I have no reason to believe that he could play outfield. I think if I'm Tony La Russa, Leury Garcia is an outfield utility player, and Danny Mendick is an infield utility player. And if I need to have Garcia play with Mendick, if like I need to rest two players, I would do that. But Garcia made a couple of really silly errors at shortstop this year. And I also, we know it's not his natural position. He started as a center fielder. He is a utility player. He can play most positions on the field, and that makes him valuable. And I think I also gave Garcia like a B- or a C+ or something. He's a great young player too, and I think he's invaluable to our team. He might be the best utility player on the team or in the league, certainly on the team. But even so, Mendick, if I'm Tony La Russa, I'm throwing Mendick in at second and short and even third behind the starters over Garcia because of his defense ability, and he's the same type of player. He's a contact hitter. He just isn't a switch hitter.
Yeah. There's some flexibility on the team, and I think Mendick, you're right, in how he stepped in, not just playing in that utility role, because again, we only had a handful of games to really see that in action, but for the virtually half the season, I think he started close to 30 games, that he did end up playing, proved himself worthy of the majors in a way that he flashed in September 2019. But then that September, you can always devalue that because it's September. It's just a duck snort of experience. We saw a little bit more. We saw, as you pointing out, the advancement perhaps of what his potential 10-year utility man, or who knows, starter, but utility man career in the majors could be with what he did. And of course, he's going to have to advance it here in 2021, which is going to likely be closer to a fuller season. Let's hope, knock on wood there. But, and I guess it remains to be seen whether he does regress, or as you're seeing some of his numbers and trends, pointing up a guy who really maybe with 2021 solidifies himself as that guy who's going to have a place in the league into his 30s. I can see what you're seeing in projecting him to that. I don't think that's certainly too much of a stretch. So, okay. B+ with that incorporated, makes a lot of sense too.
He also was projected to have like a 2 WAR on the season without being a starter, which you have to respect.
Yeah. And Collins, flip side, it's a matter of opportunities, a 3 outcomes kind of guy. Listen, I am not sold in the least. I think probably part of his grade is the opportunity was given, and some of that is deserving. Clearly, if he had come up with a big hit or even a big walk, because he's got such a great eye, the big walk, then that theoretically does lead to a little more time. He would have somehow stolen some at-bats from Edwin Encarnacion or James McCann if warranted. So I know this isn't a situation where it's just, oh, he was treated unfairly, but bullish in any way on Zach Collins, the other in the dance?
I'm actually still quite bullish on him. My issue was with 2020. Yeah. And again, I'm grading the year. I'm not grading his future. I'm not grading what his level of prospect is. I mean, the kid is still, in my opinion, a tier 1 catching prospect. But he's only 25 years old. He doesn't need to put it all together yet. And in fact, I really didn't expect him to. But here's the other thing. I kind of relate his situation to Jose Ruiz. Jose Ruiz actually looked pretty good this year, but he had such a bad year before that his appearances were probably limited because of how poorly he's performed in the past. So while I understand, too, that he can only be so much in control of what it is, or the amount of time that he gets as a player, when you break it down, the dude is still not a rookie. He has had the ability to show what he's done before. And here's the other thing. The White Sox, they signed Yasmani Grandal when they already had James McCann, and they knew Zach was still in the system. It wasn't like it was a secret that he was going to be good. They probably knew, too, that he wasn't quite ready. And he came in and he hit a home run his first at-bat in the majors. Since then, I think his cumulative batting average is like 185. I mean, the kid is just not ready for major league pitching yet. And maybe he will be next year. Maybe he's going to continue to work and hit and progress. And I certainly think he has the potential to be a tier 1 catcher. From what he did this year, I think he hit something like, 290 OPS on the year with striking out 40% of the time. I mean, even if you're only batting 20, 30 times, dude, that's not good. That's really bad.
Do you think going into 2021, it's his job to lose, or do you think the White Sox are going to shore up with some sort of maybe more defensive-minded, veteran? I know those positions are drying up, but
I think Rick Hahn really likes Yerman Mercedes, and frankly, I do too. I also, people sleep on Zebby Zavala. This dude plays great defensive catcher, and obviously he needs to put it together behind the plate. But the Sox have some really decent depth in their minors for catcher, in addition to Collins. And honestly, if I'm Rick Hahn, I'm trying to eye a trade with Jonathan Stever and Zach Collins in the package to bring in somebody who's more sure. Because here's the thing. If you think about it like this, we do have Yerman Mercedes. We already have Yasmani Grandal. We just let James McCann walk. There has to be some sense of understanding amongst the Sox brass that they don't need to rely on Zach Collins for success. And, I was harsh on Jonathan Stever. Is it Stiver? I can't remember.
Stever,
right. Yeah, he was awful this year. He was obviously called up too early, and that's the front office's fault too. But, I'm grading the year 2020. That was what I was assigned to do, and I did it. But they both still have the ability to be tier 1. Maybe Stever's more of a tier 2 prospect, but their value is incredibly high, and they don't necessarily figure into the future. So if I'm Rick Hahn, I still find ways to value Collins, and I try to get rid of him because of it.
Yeah. The thing that's funny about Yermin is maybe we forget that when things were called off last spring, he was storming. He was going to make the White Sox, in a very unpopular move, leave him off the roster. And what I loved about him is not only was he hitting to back it up, and let's face it, he's pretty much just a bat. He can catch, and I'm not sure how much you put that in quotes, but he can catch, I think. But the thing I loved is he was out there, social media or whatever, he's saying, hello, Chicago, I'm coming. Granted, I know part of that's, there's the agenda. He's putting some pressure on. He wants to, stoke the fans and such to make everybody boo loudly if he does get optioned to Charlotte. But he was making a legit run. And again, it's Cactus League games, what does it matter? But every at-bat was getting pretty scary. He was doing damage almost at bat to at bat, and then things got called off, and it's like, whoops, everybody goes home for a while, sort of forget, all that dies down. And that, I mean, he had to be the guy probably most hurt by the fact that things broke when they did, because I think he was storming his way onto the White Sox roster.
Yeah, and I think that proves my point more, right? Because if you think about it, if he was doing well in March and then things got weird and the world shut down, we came back and he couldn't sustain it, then the right decision was made anyway, because he couldn't sustain it. It doesn't matter if things went cold. Everybody stopped playing. He wasn't the only player who had to sit at home. It wasn't like, a rain delay that only one player had to suffer. It was everybody. And unfortunately, whether or not it means that he's incapable of getting it all back is not the point that I'm making. But this year, in his time that he did have, I mean, I hated every at-bat that he had. There were maybe two where I was like, okay, decent. He didn't even draw high pitch counts very often. He's just he's not doing his job as a batter yet. And that's what, like you said, that's what he's known for.
Yeah. And listen, Yermin and Sebi both know going in, they're going to be on the outside looking in for that, whatever it is, third catcher, backup catcher role, because obviously Zach still has the sheen of being a number one pick. The White Sox, it's in their interest to see them do well versus a guy they got Rule 5, or Sebi much further down the draft, who's a great story, but, I don't think they would.
Sebi might be the best defensive catcher in the system.
Yeah, and I mean, that's got to count for something if a guy can just swing it all. And, the funny thing is, until 2019, which was a really bad offensive year for him, he seemed to be showing it. He and Collins, I think you could argue, were somewhat more or less equal offensively. And, Sebi then, took it down. Zach had that great second half in Charlotte where he just went bananas with working with Mendocino. And, since then, that's sort of been the depth chart. It's not the worst position for the White Sox to be in. They clearly, I mean, even though
great problem to have,
two of the three guys arguably can't really catch behind the plate, but if they're only catching in emergencies or the one day a week that Yasmani's going to say, all right, okay, I'm too tired, because he wants to play all 162 if he can. Right. And that's not the worst position to be in. So, going in, I don't think they're forced to make a move, which is why I asked if you thought that they were going to do anything. Because,
I mean, I also think, listen, I think Yasmani is still going to be good for another 5 years. I don't think that, will he be the best catcher in baseball in 5 years? Absolutely not. But will he still be top 10, top 15? Without a question. He's a switch hitting catcher who is one of the best frame rates in the majors right now. He obviously hits the ball well. I don't think that those are going to dissipate overnight. And even if the projections are accurate, he'll still be a plus catcher in 5 years. Yeah. And let's just say that after his 4-year contract's up, they decide to let him go in 3 years from now, whenever that is. Okay, I'm sure that if we're a championship contention team, we're not going to rely on Sebi Zavala to be our everyday catcher. Rick Hahn will go out and make something happen.
Or our trio of catchers somehow
or one intact. One of them develops. I mean, listen, we have options, and that is a good problem to have. And
the guys
I would rather have players who are forced to up their game with pressure than not have enough and see them continue to fail.
For sure. We've seen enough of we got to put somebody out there. So I guess it's you because you're the oldest or you're paid the most or whatever. There seemed to be a lot of stuff that was not very merit-based, which makes it exciting that there could be a legit 7-man rotation. When you figure out Michael Kopech coming back, I mean, we could actually end up with a problem. It seems far away right now, but there could actually be a problem where it's where do you put these guys?
No more Connor Gillespie's. No more Josh Fieldses, please.
Oh man, we could play that game for the rest of this podcast. And
no more Brett.
Everybody
Anderson.
A headache.
Remember Brett Anderson? Oh my God.
Over the Brett Anderson era. Okay, let's talk about then. Maybe a guy both on the arm side and the offensive side, you anticipate having, I guess, maybe either a significantly better grade when you do this in 2021 or worse. Maybe something was a mirage about 2020.
Well, better on the hitting side, I'm going to use one of your guys, Leury Garcia. I think Leury Garcia is actually going to improve next year. He also spent most of the year on the DL, and that had an effect on his grade. And listen, I don't know if you remember this, but 2019, Leury Garcia was one of the best leadoff hitters in baseball. I had him on my fantasy team for the first 4 months. He was an incredible value. I think a lot of that will come back. He's an excellent contact hitter. He's got a plus arm in the outfield. He's going to get to spell in all 3 outfield spots, and he'll probably get some infield play too. He's also one of the most valuable bench players in all of the majors. He brings speed off the bench, a switch hitting bat. There's just so much good. I don't foresee him sitting in the C's. On the pitcher side, that's a little actually tougher for me to judge. I'd like to think it's Dylan Cease if I pick anybody. I think Dylan Cease has the ability to go further up than anyone else who is kind of lower on the list. Yeah. But, I think Jimmy Cordero is probably the prime candidate to make the biggest turnaround next year. He has incredible stuff. And, with the Tony La Russa's ability to build bullpen usage as well as he does, I foresee Cordero having a renaissance year next year.
Yeah, we know you're tough, Jimmy. You do not get paid by the appearance. You can say, hey, my bicep needs a little bit more rest, and you really could imagine his numbers really take a nice turn because he's just not getting so much. I know there are some guys who can pull it off. They can't pull it off for many years. They can pull it off for maybe a couple of years, that kind of overuse. And let's face it, if he was overused and just kicked ass, great. That's going to look really good when it comes to arbitration time. But he didn't. So I think the fact that they're going to have at least a couple more arms to throw into that mix, and maybe you're going to have somebody who manages a bullpen better, or let's at least say differently, but probably better. It's got to be a benefit for him. So yeah, I could see there being some real ceiling for him.
And for a little extra credit, I would also like to say I think that both Ian Hamilton and Carlos Rodon are going to have better years next year if they land on the right spot. I mean, Ian Hamilton, I think being in Philly is a great place for him. If he gets the opportunities, he had the stuff originally to impress people. But if Carlos Rodon ends up in a rotation and he's fully healthy, he still has a lot of potential. And, I feel bad that it didn't work out with him in the Sox because I've always really liked him. He's a workhorse lefty who threw hard and got strikeouts, confused batters, hard to make contact with him when he's throwing it right. But his timing just didn't work out with the Sox. It's sad. But imagine if he were to end up going to like Anaheim or Los Angeles and play the Angels and, be with Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon batting behind him. That would give him some confidence and he could do well.
Well, let's leave school now. Let's close the book. The book is closed. We're gonna drop the report card notion. Let's talk a little bit cold stove, and let's start with Rodon. Any chance you think he got enough ego and a sort of mouthy agent that says there's no way you're coming back in a minor league deal with the White Sox? There's no way you're coming back in a reduced role. Do you think there's enough hunger for teams out there to take a chance on a guy who's a number 3 draft choice that there's no chance he's coming back to the South Side?
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I mean, is it possible? Sure. I mean, if he really loves the organization and he's willing to take like $1.5 million, maybe. But I just don't foresee a team like the Giants or the Tigers or some team that needs a decent starter in the back end that he would be a great fit for.
Yeah, has innings for him. Has a
if he's healthy, he gives you 180 innings. He gives you 180 strikeouts. He's a really solid left-handed pitcher, and I don't foresee him making less than $3 or $4 million next year in a starting spot.
Those are big ifs. 180 if it was just so easy for him. All right, let's talk a little bit of cold stove. I don't know. There's this guy. I think when we first talked, you were sort of really high on. It's this sort of annoying, kind of gnatish kind of guy, Trevor Bauer.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Donald Trump.
Oh, well, we can get to him, but let's talk more baseball and let's address Trevor Bauer because he's probably not coming to Chicago, but
just to clarify, I'm not high on Donald Trump, but go ahead. No, yes, Trevor Bauer, listen, I actually still think it would be an incredible signing. I am very annoyed with what he and his agent are doing this offseason. I think it's kind of desecrating the, offseason routine, and it already is struggling enough as it is. Yeah. The last thing the fans want to see is a bunch of YouTube videos from you and your agent talking about how you are ranking which fans make memes about you. I mean, what an arrogant thing to do. Regardless, the dude is still an elite thrower. And, right, I mean, I just want him to be quiet. Just, dude, show up and let your –
He won't be, Rob. This is the problem. He's going to kill the locker room.
You can't deny the dude's spin rate is through the roof. The guy is he has an unbelievable ability to strike batters out and, keep contact rate low, and that's what you need in a starter. And listen, if you're going to tell me that you would turn your nose up at Lucas Giolito, Trevor Bauer, Lance Lynn, and Dallas Keuchel throwing the ball every 4 games, you and I disagree on a multitude of things.
Rob, I'm sorry, especially at the price. I would turn my nose up because his spin rate also involves spinning the heads of the front office and even a fair amount of, I'm going to just guess gender-wise about half the fans. But I understand there's value. And clearly, if he's annoyed you with the games he's playing, with the social media nonsense, and I mean, not that the whole process is dignified or that there's some precedent that it's supposed to be like legit.
No, but he's acting very uncool.
He's in the catbird seat. He doesn't have to play this game.
Right.
There's no other competition.
You're right. And listen, I'm not arguing that in the least. I just, at the same time, it's the same thing with Tony La Russa. Do I think the hire was good? No. Am I willing to give him a chance to win me a championship? Absolutely. Yeah. Go out there and shut me up.
What choice we got?
Prove me wrong. I don't have a choice. Yeah. Jerry runs the team. More on that later. But listen, I'll just say this: if I'm Jerry Reinsdorf, I'm in the twilight of my life, probably the last 10, 15 years. He probably knows that. I want to win a championship before I go. Trevor Bauer, if you look at who's available next year, the year after, and the year after that, there are really no pitchers that the White Sox would stand a legitimate chance of signing that would fit the bill as well as Bauer does and hold the statistics at the level that he does. Is he the best character guy? Probably not even close. But for me, at the end of the day, unless you're breaking the law, unless you're hurting your teammates and being a douche, I mean, I want to win. So yes, bring in some guy who's got a hot head, and come to a blue collar city where the fans hold you accountable. I think he would do well here. I want him to stop with the YouTube stuff. Just come on, man. Let's be a professional.
Well, it's perhaps our final seg of the podcast, but I wish I had more faith as an older man. I wish I had more faith in humanity these days to think that, yes, he would respond well in this blue-collar challenge. Because on paper, you're exactly right. On paper, this writes out a fairy tale for sure. I just don't know if that is a greater than 50% chance or even a 10% chance. It makes me nervous when we're not talking about a guy on a 3-year, $30 million deal. We're talking about a guy who's going to command probably upwards of $30 million plus a year. And, again, hey, it's Jerry's money. He's got it, but we'll hear about it for the rest of our lives if it doesn't work out because that money was spent.
Yeah, exactly. But just out of curiosity, are there trade options that you see on the market that could fill his role, or potentially even the right field gap that I still think remains, or a reliever, something that might help?
It definitely speaks to what they did with Lynn, which is the ideal type of trade for the White Sox. It's a guy that even though fans are saying, "Oh my God, will he sign an extension?" Which I'm part of that because I want to know we're getting something more than just a year.
I think Lynn would be silly not to sign with us.
Yeah, and for the Sox, it's ideal because if it doesn't work out, they're not committed.
Right.
If it does work out, if it only works out okay, they can commit at a rate that might even be less than what he's getting paid. I mean, this is the way the White Sox like to operate, and I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong. To some degree, you got to play smart business in sports. I know, fans maybe sometimes can lose sight of that a bit, and I'm certainly one of those fans. But it certainly has to fit that type of thing. It's this mid-commitment, like signing a Quintana, or it's a trade where you're getting a guy who's coming off the books, maybe even at a high rate, maybe at a higher rate of pay than Lynn's getting, but it's got to be a guy that can strike in that sense because they're either not going to probably put up the prospect capital, or if they even have it, for a guy who's younger, still on the rise, guys we'd like to strike for, but it's just not going to happen. The Sox don't have it. Or it's a guy that maybe is looking at a Chicago Cubs type of situation where it's like, oh hey, you're cutting half your team, and you got, a Cleveland Indians situation where, the Sox can come in and sort of be opportunistic and strike. And they've done it once. I hope there's some other deals that Hahn can sort of dig out or is pursuing, because as you pointed out, there's nothing free agent wise that's going to even come close to a Bauer, which I think, as we've just addressed, is a dicey issue no matter what.
Sure.
Talent aside, it's dicey, and especially dicey when the White Sox do not like adding zeros to those checks. So,
well, let me throw a few names your way. Let me see how you feel about these. My personal favorite that I would love to see is Joe Musgrove. I don't know if that's something that's potentially real, but I've heard some whispers the Pirates are trying to move him.
Sure.
I think he would fit in really well here. Mm-hmm. He fits that Garrett Cole, leaves Pittsburgh, becomes an ace kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And he has the stuff for it too.
Absolutely. That's perfect.
I'm not sure how you feel about him. I really like Luis Castillo. I know he's 31, but I think that he's really talented. I think he would be a decent fit for at least a couple of years.
He's done it. Exactly. I mean, you've got a track record. And here's the thing. I don't know that part of the reason, forget the fact it's 30 million plus, or that he's a jerk, or he's going to play with a drone or whatever. Part of the reason, and a legit reason potentially, to not go in for Bauer is that that's a commitment you're going to make that could potentially, it's not a bad problem to have, but hamstring the fact that you've got this number of guys you all see as, obviously they seem like a Kopech as being a starter for years, Cease for years. So striking for a guy, even if you were to sign him for just a couple, 3 years, I think that sort of fits what the White Sox want. They want to give some of these young guys a little bit more time because they've sort of demanded that they need it. Dylan Cease can't go in as maybe even the number 4. You really got to give him that break where it's like, we're not going to put too much on your shoulders, right, because you still need that seasoning. You are not a veteran yet, and you have not pitched like a veteran yet. So I think, striking right in there. The Sox aren't going to overcommit for a number of reasons, which is what makes Bauer so tricky for this team. Or if there were several other guys like him, would still be tricky, their past history aside. So the Musgroves and the Castillos of the world are those ideal fits. Might not cost you a ton in trade, not going to cost you a ton in the pocketbook.
And the White Sox have tons of talent capital to give away in the minor league level still. I think I said this in my first piece. I think Keith Law and all the minor league system adjudicators now have been really unfair to the White Sox minor league system because of a couple of injuries and the rate at which they've called players up. I mean, I think the White Sox still have one of the best farm systems in all baseball.
They certainly have guys they know they're going to have to need to move on. I mean, because you continue to bring in talent. You're trading for Lins. You're signing the Cespedes. So, I mean, the fact that you're still adding to it while guys, Rutherford, Gonzalez, Mike Rodolfo. I mean, you've got guys now who are just
Jake Burger.
Yeah, sure. And so, at some point, the path to them fitting on the major league roster at some point is going to get narrow to the point where they're going to have to be used for something. And I'm sure other teams are aware of that to a degree, but not so much that they can sit back and just say, well, we're going to catch this guy in waivers. We're going to catch him for nothing. So, you cobble together 2, 3, 4 of those guys you're mentioning, Collins and Steve, or whatever the combinations are, there's stuff out there. And I would have to think the phone is overloaded.
Matthew Thompson.
With Hahn going after
trying
to put together those pieces, whether you project them to the majors or not, with Dunning, it's not an indictment on Dunning and trade him. It's just, hey, window wise, which we don't even know how narrow it is. It could be very narrow. It's definitely not a guarantee to be all the 2020s. You got to strike now.
Bernardo Flores.
Yeah.
James Beard. Yolbert Sanchez.
Yeah.
One of the great shortstop prospects in all of baseball.
And no GM for any of those names is falling out of their chair over it. You put a couple of those together. You put a guy that you're not going to be able to keep or doesn't fit in with the team now because you've got an ace on a team that's going to win 60 games. Come on. Those are the deals you got to make.
If I'm Pittsburgh, and the Chicago White Sox offer me, Jonathan Stever, Gavin Sheets, Jake Berger, and, Luis Gonzalez. I'm giving them Joe Musgrove and, some international signing bonus money just to top it off. I mean, that's such a good deal for both teams.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it wouldn't even have to be that generous. I wouldn't think.
I don't think so either. But the White Sox could afford a deal like that.
Yeah.
And not be very affected. That's the point.
Yeah, and it's great that say a team like San Diego has perhaps more prime prospects. They're getting deals done that the White Sox are, let's face it, they're simply, no matter what we think of their system, simply not able to do on the same level. But there's still a whole tier of guys that the White Sox can turn into very viable players and who have already shown it, the Musgroves of the world, who are attainable for really any combination of prospects, certainly ones that have the skill level the White Sox prospects.
I'd push back a little on that and say, I didn't even list Andrew Vaughn, Michael Kopech, Garrett Crochet, Jared Kelly, who all of whom should be untouchable, in my personal opinion. But, the Padres are looking at their top prospects and saying, well, I mean, we can get rid of them because we have no more holes to fill once we get the players that we want in these trades. Yeah. And look, San Diego's trying to win this year. They think they're better than the Dodgers, and the Dodgers just won it. The White Sox, they think they can win it this year, but they also know that they'll be able to win it for the next 5 years. I'm not sure the Padres will be in the same position 2 or 3 years from now, but the White Sox will. And it depends very much so on who they acquire. But let's talk about, some non-pitching players, some position players like Chris Bryant or Clint Frazier, who, would obviously be better than Adam Eaton in right field. We wouldn't have to give up nearly as much as Andrew Vaughn or Michael Kopech or Jared Kelly to get them. But we still could give up plenty of prospects and not lose depth. Yeah. It's actually pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I never felt too uptight. I know that under Ken Williams, the farm was stretched maybe sometimes to outrageous limits, but it never really got me too uptight because I always saw those types of deals as being means to an end. And yes, maybe a couple did bite the White Sox back. Trading Gio Gonzalez was one that didn't really work out for the White Sox. Right. But in the vast majority of cases, those players maybe never even make the majors. It doesn't necessarily matter whether your guys worked out either. If neither, at worst, it's a lose-lose. I always see that capital as a means to an end to get guys. You want to turn 3 of those guys who might never make the majors or you don't know their impact into one guy is going to make an impact at the level. And I hope that Hahn has incorporated enough of that Ken Williams attitude. Perhaps Ken was maybe overly aggressive. He always thought he was just one player away and was always, Kenny gets his guy type of situation. I think Hahn's a little cooler than that. But that said, I hope he's incorporating some of that into it because at some point there's not room. There's 26 spots on the roster and, a good 15 of them are untouchable at this point. They're unmovable. So there's only so much space to use, which makes grabbing a guy like Adam Eaton, snatching him up, a guy who you can't get rid of now, that's almost worse than the amount of money spent or even the guy. He's not going – he's on the roster.
Right, exactly. And, I can get into the Eaton stuff for hours if you really wanted me to, but I just wanted to quickly make a point going back for a second. Think about this. In the last 6 years, the White Sox have had Tim Anderson, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Marcus Semien in the same organization. That blows my mind and speaks to how well despite some of their misses, it speaks to how well the scouting department is operating for the Chicago White Sox, particularly in the infield.
Yeah. And again, flukes. Semien wasn't what he was when he was traded. Obviously, Tatis was not. But you're right. Those do trace their lineage to the White Sox. And hopefully the ratio of guys doing it for other teams is going to decrease so that we can say, oh, look at the homegrown talent that's brought the White Sox a World Series instead of the Padres a World Series. But it still does trace to guys who were, rooted out by the White Sox for sure.
Or we could just put together an offer to the Phillies that does include Andrew Vaughn and get us both Bryce Harper and Zach Wheeler and solve all our problems in one fell swoop.
I'll take just one. And Vaughn, a guy who you just don't see where he's going to play for the White Sox, is a guy I think is a chip. Though I don't want to trade him, I also don't see where he plays with the team committed to Abreu. So
he takes over for Abreu in 3 years. And he plays DH, and they spell each other in the meantime. But I will say this, that if Bryce Harper wanted to come to the Chicago White Sox and all we had to do was give up Andrew Vaughn and maybe Matthew Thompson or something, I would do that trade 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000 times.
Absolutely. 100%. We can agree there. We may not agree on Trevor Bauer, but we agree on bringing Bryce Harper to solve the right field problem that has seemingly not been solved since, I don't know, Jermaine Dye. I don't even know. Adam Eaton had a year, I guess. Oh, God.
Adam Eaton had one good year for 2. Eaton was the only good right fielder since Jermaine Dye. because Alex Rios broke my heart.
Thought that was an aggressive strike by Ken Williams. And although, surprisingly enough, Rios did have 2 very strong years for the White Sox, he also had at least 1, if not 2, unbelievably bad seasons. So that 2011 season was...
Yeah, I've repressed a lot of the Alex Rios years because they also involved Mr. Dunn, who also broke my heart.
I'll never forget Adam Dunn. I was covering the team at the time. Adam Dunn coming out for the second half saying, I had a talk with Alex Rios. We're going to put this team on our back in the second half. And of course, nobody was like, okay, but you think, all right, that takes some cojones. Well,
didn't work out.
That year. Not that year. Whew, quite a combination. Well, hey, vaguely speaking, are we looking at 2021 as a better year than 2020? It almost can't be worse, correct?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I hope you're talking about baseball, but if you're talking about the world as a whole, I also think you're right. Yeah. Even so, I think 2021 is going to be an excellent year for the White Sox. Guess who's gone? Cookie and Lindor. They're gone, baby.
That's true.
Indians are out of this thing. It is the White Sox and the Twins, and I don't think the Twins are as good as the White Sox. They are in decline. Their best player is Josh Donaldson, who's going to be 36 years old soon or something. He's making $20 million a year to bat 210. I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting. Yeah, it's definitely become a 2-team race at this point, and it's as strange as it is to just have a team take itself out of the running. We sort of knew they were going to do that. We knew it was just a matter of time that was going to happen. So, And I just got an alert with that little tick, tick, tick that said Twitter has permanently banned Donald Trump from tweeting.
Whoa!
So that's our big segue into the fact that the world might be a better place in 2021, because can it necessarily get worse than having our Capitol stormed to begin the year?
No, I don't think.
I'm not sure it can be.
What a dark day in American history.
Yeah.
I'll just say very quickly, I think on that subject, regardless of where you fall on the aisle, I'm not one to shame anyone for any of their beliefs. I think the great bedrock of America is your freedom to think and feel however you want without repercussion, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. But I would certainly hope that what happened on Wednesday in our nation's capital is not looked highly upon by anybody, because it is a absolute disgrace to what our country is founded upon.
It's a sad march. It's culminated in this, but it's something that didn't just drop out of the sky. We've been moving toward this now for years, and let's hope maybe finally this is it. I don't know. I hope there's not something worse to come that we then say, I hope this is it, because we've said several times now already in the past 4 years, wow, this has to be it. So let's hope this is it, and we can start pulling back from where this group of people and this type of thinking has gotten us, which is literally threatening the lives and planning on taking lives of our elected representatives, which, if that isn't crossing the line with, by the way, a president, vaguely or not, cheering it on. If that isn't beyond the pale, then come on, we've got to pull back from that.
We're better than that. Let's come together and let's be the United States of America again.
Goodness. We don't have a White Sox fan in the Oval Office. I mean, obviously.
We used to.
Things were better then.
For 8 wonderful, spectacular years.
And he still represents when he's out there. Even if he's got to wear like a Cardinals jacket because he's at Busch Stadium or whatever, he still rocks the Sox.
He's a Southsider.
Well, I guess, hey, listen, Rob, I think we've covered school.
We ran the gamut today.
We've covered the free market. We've covered tempestuous free agents, and we've covered the state of politics in the United States and the world today. So I don't know if there's anywhere else to go with that. So I think
need a nap. I'm going to sleep.
Man, and still no Chewy appearance. I'm going to expect better next time, and let's have a next time soon. In fact, it could be here in the next few weeks that perhaps you are even co-hosting your own program with Side Sox. So that would be really cool, but we'll see how that develops. I'm sure we'll give that a nice big splash when and if it does come about, but that'll be exciting.
Coming.
And certainly, if nothing else, continue to be a guest on the Side Sox podcast, please.
Would love that. Thank you so much for having me. You'll see me again soon with my dear friend Bill Meinke. We're going to have a brand new White Sox based podcast just for you guys. And of course, it's always a pleasure to come here and chat with you. And look out for part 3 of the grading series, which will cover management and coaches and the executives. And I'll even have a fun little extra one just for Steve Stone and Jason Benetti.
I was going to say perhaps the most fun one of all, because I'm guessing you're going to have a little bit more leeway. There's technically no metrics for the front office, so probably gives you a little bit more room.
We're going to have some fun with the last one. We're going to wait until pitchers and catchers report just so that we can give the Sox all the time that they possibly need to make all the moves to optimize our team.
Could be a last-minute Edwin Encarnacion signing, Rob.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare. How dare you? I'm waving my Italian.
It's got to be better. It's a better year. It's got to be better. Well, everybody, thanks as always for listening, for reading. We'll have tons more content. We got all Hall of Fame voting. That's pretty much our theme for January. But of course, any news that warms up the hot stove will be on as well. And there'll be a lot more podcast material as well, including the flagship Side Sox Podcast. Rob Colletti, thanks for joining me again, making it a Paisan pod once more, and we'll do it again soon, if not before, perhaps at least at the time of the publication of part 3.
Hey, forget about it.
Can we do that?
Forget about it.
Right. For all our countrymen out there, it's Brett signing off for Rob, and thanks for listening, and keep on reading Southside Sox.